Hello. Trump's terrifying speech about Russia, which took place yesterday, absolutely demands commentary. But here, it's important to consider one thing. I'm not a political analyst. For this reason, many political aspects that are routine for active politicians and, accordingly, for those who constantly comment on them are not very familiar to me. I might be able to understand some specific intricacies, which, by the way, are mostly not about politics but about internal power struggles. But political analysts don't always distinguish between these two things. As for purely political matters, I'm honestly not very strong in that area. But it's worth noting that quite a few political analysts have already commented on this topic yesterday and this morning. I read Professor Estie's comments with great interest, but nevertheless, I have to point out that some aspects, primarily those related to internal economic matters, are not reflected in his analysis. Maybe, however, he simply didn't want to address those. So, what needs to be said? First of all, Trump lives in a completely classic black and white world. In other words, there is us, there is our main enemy, and today that's China, not anyone else. And the key task is to bring as many people as possible over to our side, and not to China's. Some might say, but how can that be? What about his tariff tricks? Well, everyone more or less understands that the UK is already working on China's side, whether you impose tariffs on them or not. As for the European Union, it seems that Trump, and not just Trump, has basically written them off as a geopolitical player. But we are a very important factor. And here, Putin's big visit at the end of August is a key moment. For Trump, it's fundamentally important not to push Russia into China's arms. For this reason, everything is being postponed until after that visit. In the meantime, there are various hints that we need to resolve all the issues we have on topics that the U.S. doesn't really care much about. For example, the issue of Ukraine. So, in fact, we've been implicitly told that if we resolve the issue before mid-September, then the U.S. will basically wash its hands of it. This is a very interesting point. Well, it's just really interesting because I'll talk a bit later about the financial scheme. But the most important thing is that in the scheme Trump proposed, Ukraine isn't mentioned at all. And the second point is that the Gleanas and Graham bill has already been stopped. So basically, they're kind of offering us a deal. Guys, don't be friends with China. From the perspective of the logic I've been laying out for many years, actually 25 years, this is fundamentally the wrong approach, because the world won't be bipolar, it'll be made up of currency zones. And there will be at least 4 of them. And for this reason, the United States still doesn't see this yet. But the United Kingdom, for example, is trying to break in as the 5th player. And, accordingly, Iran has basically bowed out. In other words, they couldn't handle it. So, the fact that Trump doesn't see these currency zones and a different system, that's definitely his major weakness. Now, let's keep going. If we assume that Trump is looking at the situation from mid-September, that means he expects the collapse being discussed, the one that would wipe out all existing structures, won't happen in the summer, but sometime later. Well, apparently not much later, but still later. And what does that mean? It means that Trump is confident he'll resolve the budget issues that are coming up in July. That can only mean one thing. He pressured Powell, and the money will be printed. Now the question is, what did he use to pressure Powell? I'd like to draw your attention to the scheme that Trump is proposing. For the European Union, it's impossible to abandon Ukraine. Because of this, without American weapons, it can't do anything. Trump shifted relations with the European Union onto purely financial tracks. He says, money up front, I'll give you weapons, and you can give them to Ukraine or not. But that will be your decision, not mine. I'm not involved here. Money up front only. Where does the European Union get its money from? And here, precisely, comes the question I raised on Saturday in Economics in Russian. What if Powell gave them money? Well, according to American law, loans to the ECB are already unregulated. So, let's say Powell gave $200 billion to the European Union, and the EU, on that basis, printed another 300 billion euros. And they're planning to do something with that money. This is just me speculating. Yes, it's not a fact. And, of course, this drove Trump mad. That's why he started putting pressure on Powell. Because Powell, already realizing that there was some kind of collusion in crisis management, decided that, well. By the way, the rumors about Powell stepping down might also be connected to this whole story. And after that, everything is clear. Then, the Europeans will have to pay back that money, and for that, they'll be supplied with some kind of weapons. What kind of quality will it be? How will it be delivered? You know how it goes. Money in the morning, chairs in the evening. And if the money comes in before the crash, but then the crash happens, it might turn out that there won't be any weapons at all. For now, it's just a promise. But this is a very interesting point, and these kinds of intricate details, that's exactly the job of political analysts. And I find this, personally, incredibly fascinating. But I prefer to read about it, because I can't really discuss these topics myself. But when it comes to economics, I can discuss it. So, what do we get out of this? Let's try to draw a final conclusion now. What is it? He gave the money. For this reason, there won't be a crash before autumn. Trump's key objective is to make sure that Russia doesn't unite with China against the United States. And that's why he's ready to give carte blanche. Well, as you can imagine, 50 days could just as easily turn into 60 or 70. And then, who knows, a crisis might hit and it won't matter anymore. But the key thing is to make sure Russia and China don't come to an agreement in August. That's the main story here. That's the most important problem that needs to be solved. And that's why he did what he just did. It's already absolutely clear that it's impossible to stop this crisis. And so, in this situation, the European Union is written off. It will have to return the money it received. And after that, whatever happens to it, well, what difference does it make? And the situation is also hanging in the balance in the South Caucasus and the Middle East, because it's obvious that London will try to stir up a big war there. But, as far as I understand, Azerbaijan has received clear instructions from Iran that if it does anything wrong, then no matter what happens around, well, Azerbaijan will be eliminated by Iran. And since Iran has the resources for this and it wouldn't have to spend too much, I wouldn't rule out that activity in this direction will decrease somewhat. Well, I think that the topic of the Middle East, specifically from an economic point of view, will still need to be discussed, though not today or tomorrow. But the key question, here's the real question, I still want to ask it here. Of course, Erdogan can play the Sultan as much as he wants, get involved in all sorts of games, in the reshuffling in the Caucasus and so on, but there's one big problem: he doesn't have any money. Turkey's economic resources today are extremely limited. So, what is he going to use to play these games? The United Kingdom is twisting the arms of both Turkey and Israel in order to provoke a strike against Iran. But I have a suspicion that these actions are so suicidal that Erdogan won't go for them. Although, when it comes to Israel, I can't say anything for sure. But this is really the only point that could still provoke trouble before the end of the summer. But I don't rule out that, in this case, Trump might be able to keep the situation under control. So if that's the case, then all the major events will be pushed to the second half of September or October. That's the situation as of today. I'll say it again. All of this is what you might call analytical speculation, because there are no concrete facts yet. And let's not forget that the pressure on Trump related to Epstein's lists and some other circumstances will definitely continue within the U.S. And for that reason, it's possible he might snap and get involved in some kind of reckless venture. Or maybe not. But again, this is where political analysts come into play, because these kinds of small tactical moves have little to do with the economy. In any case, as they say, we'll be keeping an eye on this topic. Thank you. Thank you for your attention.